As always, our show is sponsored by Memoria Press. You can find our curriculum at memoriapress.com.
Welcome to Classical Etc., a show from Memoria Press that dives into the philosophy, culture, and heart of classical education. You're in the studio with Shane Saxon.
Welcome to another episode of Classical Etc. I'm seated with Paul, our old friend Tom Sculthorpe, and Martin Cothran. Now, Tom, in this episode, we're not going to discuss math, mainly because you don't want to be in a box. And I want you to feel affirmed that I don't think of you only as a math guy, but as a math guy plus.
Does he actually know other things?
I like the plus. It's a math operation.
That's right. See, everything comes back to math.
I thought Tom was going to say he'd rather be like seen as a human being that loves math and other things as well, but he's a math guy.
I was also going to say that you don't have to affirm.
No, I want you to feel like
my interests.
I appreciate you. And so on today's episode, we're going to be discussing the idea of free time. Now, before we get into that, I have a question for you three. And instead of asking you what you've been reading recently, I wanted to ask a different question. Is there any way over the course of the three of your lives that you have tracked or journaled the type of books that you read or when you read books? Have you ever done any of this kind of journaling or tracking of your reading? Because there's, I personally am more fastidious about like keeping lists of the movies I watch and the dates that I watch them. But I've upped my attempts to also do the same with books. Books I kind of tend to just kind of go in and out of. And as a helpful point of reflection, I know other people do this. Do any of the three of you participate in this activity?
I am floored by this idea of keeping track of the movies you watch when you watch them. Mm-hmm. I'm just going to say that the way I track them is on in my living room, I have a book of my bookshelves. And those are all books that I want to read or I've read partially and I would like to finish. The books in the basement on my bookshelves are books that I have read. And that's the way I track it.
Well, have you guys ever participated in any kind of journaling, keeping track?
Well, first of all, I think journal is a noun and not a verb.
But I made it
so
a verb.
You can't journal. This is this is a disease in our language that we want to.
It's called a neologism.
We want to verb.
Is
everything.
it a disease or is it
I call it,
or is it progress?
I call it verbing. Because verbing is an example of a noun. Verb is a noun.
So you're just participating in that which you are decrying.
I'm satirizing it. I'm lampooning it. Anyway. Okay, so I do not journal. I never journal. I write things down.
In a book which is called a journal.
Yes, the book is called a journal. Noun. Anyway, so I have a list. I actually have a list.
Yeah.
Of all the books I want to read before I die.
Okay.
And it's got a little check.
Nice.
On it. It's on my computer, and the only reason I have it is not to keep track of what I've read necessarily, except only in the service of allowing me to see what I really need the next most important book. Mm. That, because I'm, we're getting up in age here, so you got to make sure you hit the biggies. And so I can look over the list. The ones I've already read are checked off. I can just look at the ones that I have not checked off and see, okay, so what's another big one I need to get out of the way here that I have not read that I really do need to read before I die?
Sure. Tom, what about you?
Well, I'm a bit humbled. I don't. Okay. I have not done that. I kind of have different fields that I move in and out of, even in the same day.
Not just math.
Yeah, right. The only thing that I've done over the past couple years is I've kind of set up a rotation in my leisure time reading where I'll move from like kind of magisterial biography to classical literature to like a book, like a cultural commentary, current time. And I just kind of rotate through that.
Right. And do you ever kind of get out of the cycle, or you're pretty strict on going through the various genres?
Recently, I stepped out of it for a couple weeks and read a book about the New England Patriots dynasty.
Wow.
And because I thought just getting an insider picture on how Robert Kraft and Bill Belichick did what they did for 20 years.
Did they make the playoffs this year?
I'm not necessarily a fan. It's just a matter of.
I'll answer the question. No.
Yeah, they did. No, it's just a matter of just acknowledging the fact that in the salary cap era, no other team has even come close to what they were able to do and sustain. And from a leadership perspective, just trying to understand
organizational leadership perspective, especially given that it was an organization that was terrible for decades.
Right.
Yeah. That's interesting. So I at one time was challenged to write 1-page reflections after any book that I read. And I think I do that somewhat consistently, not perfectly consistently, but I think going beyond that, I found that with kind of keeping lists, that it could be just neurosis, but it could be that when I keep lists, it actually helps me to retain what I enjoyed from books, because I'm able to recall where I was in my life when I read a book. So I think it's an interesting habit that may be helpful for some people or may not. Now, one of the reasons I ask too is that it's been a way that I have tried to better use my free time. In classical education, the project of classical education is to attempt to educate, students, but someone has said educate adults who will then live great lives, and a part of their lives are going to be their free time. So our classical education is hopefully equipping them to use that free time well. So we're going to talk about that, but before we get to the question, we are talking about it because specifically it's in a little book called Great Ideas from the Great Books by Dr. Mortimer Adler. Martin, you've referred to this book as your secret weapon. Why do you say that?
Well, what it consists of, and I believe that these were actually articles from a column that Mortimer Adler wrote in newspapers for many years. It was a sort of the Great Ideas version of Dear Abby.
Yeah.
People would write in and they would ask a question about, what is justice? And he would answer the question. And he, in the book is just about 4 pages in a small book. And so what he's done basically, he put the great book set, as you can see in the background here, together with Robert Hutchins at the University of Chicago in the 50s and 60s. He put the Syntopicon together, which is volumes 2 and 3 of that, which is an index to the great books. He did all the stuff about the great books, and then he produces this little thing, which is like everything just boiled down to its absolute essential. So if you're talking about justice, the article in the Syntopicon volume in the Great Books series is going to be 20, 40 pages long, whereas in here it's 4 little pages, and he just boils it all down. I mean, I love that, the idea of that, the idea.
Absolutely, the idea of it.
So you can it's just great little reference work. If you want to remind yourself what it is that the Greeks said about what justice was, what the Bible said justice was, you just go to his article and he just has boiled it down in there.
It strikes me that someone with a classical education would have been exposed to all of the questions that he's asking, but maybe have never read a concise treatment of each one. Tom, before we get into discussion of leisure time, you read the chapter, hopefully I sent you.
I did.
Thank you. How did the book strike you? Have you ever read a book like this, or what did you think of it?
I appreciated the conciseness and the clarity of what Dr. Adler had to say in response to the question. And it was very stimulating. So, I mean, I think I would agree. It's a powerhouse of a little book. To be stimulating in such a small number of pages is challenging.
Paul, you found your mother's card that
her book club schedule in there from 2002. So when she was moving recently, she was getting rid of a bunch of books, and she's like, "You can go through these, take what you want before I get rid of them." And so I found this Martin's Secret Weapon in this, several boxes of books, and this is one of the few that I took. And so I found her schedule in here. I had no idea she ever did this. And with her notes, she was learning about, divine and human law. And, and that's the thing is it covers so much, but you can, her book club, they were reading like 3 of these. So we're talking just about 1, but they were covering about 3 a week. And, but you can skip around, it's not something that you got to read front to back.
Yeah. We should probably say the title again, because people are going to forget. The Great Ideas is it Great Ideas from the Great Book?
Yes, the Great Ideas from the Great Books.
Mortimer Adler.
Yeah. Do you know if this is still in print?
No, it's not in print. We're actually hoping to be able to republish it.
Yeah. So before we get into our discussion of free time, we're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back. On your mark, get set, go live. Classical Etc. is hitting the road and going live at the Great Homeschool Convention in Cincinnati, Ohio this coming April. We'll be there with the rest of the Memoria Press team to meet with you, answer your questions, and come together at this table for a live taping of Classical Etc. Join us in Cincinnati April 13th through 15th at the Great Homeschool Convention. Follow the link in the description to learn more. Hope to see you there. The title of the question is, how should we use our free time? And in the book, there are various questions from readers, I guess, because Martin said this is part of his column. And the gist of the question that was posed to Dr. Adler was, isn't it bad for society that we have so much free time now? Which is a very interesting question and comes from a very different time. And Dr. Adler responds by making some distinctions. But let me pose you three the question, and you can answer it and interact with Dr. Adler's answer. So, Martin, is it bad for society that we have so much free time today?
Yes and no. I think we as human beings, for one thing, I think Adler would agree with this, need to work. And he kind of says that in here, that there's a time to work and there's a time to play. You have cultures who in certain people in different times, it's all they can do is work, and that's probably not good. But then again, if all you do is play, that's really not good either. You need a time to labor, and then you need a time to just do what he would call what we call leisure things. He likes free time better than leisure. To do things that need to be done. If you look at how civilization was formed, one of the things Edith Hamilton says about the Greeks is they were the first culture to play. They have the Olympics. Nobody had ever done that before. They had time to play. They didn't neglect work, but they had time to play, and they're really the first culture to do that. They're also the first culture that really developed an advanced civilization, and I don't think that's a coincidence.
Paul, Dr. Adler does make this distinction that Martin alluded to in saying, you're talking about free time in the question, but maybe we should divide that term up more carefully. What do you make of his definitions?
Well, I think it was a great distinction to make, right? Because he says you've got free time, and within that free time, you can be doing leisure work. He calls it something speculative work or something along those lines. You can be doing leisure work, or you can be doing playing within that free time, right? Basically, he says the time that we're working at our jobs, that's needed labor, and that is just to provide for our sustenance. So the question is, what do we do outside of that in that quote unquote free time? Are we playing? And he would lump entertainment into that, any form of relaxation, or are we working on character, culture, etc.? And I think that's a great distinction, because most people, the way our society works, it's work and it's play, and leisure. The reason he doesn't like the term leisure is because so many people use that term to mean play instead of using it to mean to mean a different form of toil.
Yeah, toil, and he says specifically, just simply, work in the liberal arts and the sciences. That's what he calls leisure. Mm-hmm. Tom, let me ask you the question: what should we do with our free time? No, and I don't want to put you in a box, but you're a math teacher, so you probably get this question from parents.
Yes,
should my kid spend all of his quote unquote free time doing math drills? What should we do with our free time?
Well, I do math problems.
Yeah, I know.
No, the article struck me. It caught me a little off guard, because if you ask me, what do you do with your free time? My immediate response would be, I don't have any. Now, the helpful distinction that he makes between play and leisure caused me to change my initial answer. So, yeah, I'm not here at Memoria Press all the time.
About 85 hours a week.
Right, something like that. Now, the rest of the time during my week is taken up with study, which I think would fall under his category of leisure.
I agree.
Leisure toil, right? And so I'm writing a dissertation that's leisure toil, and that's a choice I've made to use time outside of work to that end. And then the other big time commitment of mine is my family and church, especially my kids. And so I think also that would fall under leisure time, and in the sense that I'm contributing to their character development, or I'm participating in culture through the church. So I guess I would revise my answer and say I don't have very much, if any, play time.
Yeah. Martin, what do you think of Tom's claim that family life is leisure? Or do you think that that's subsistence work?
Well, the point I was going to make is, and I think we would say, all of us would say that our work involves a lot of the things that, at least for me, I'm doing in my private time also. I mean, it involves a lot of reading. It involves, writing to me is a creative activity. I think that's the other thing I think part of what you need to have outside of your work that's really labor and is not something that enriches you in some other way, like my job really does. Okay, so you have your leisure time. You can use it for this kind of work toil, not work toil,
subsistence toil,
leisure work, which can be the same as what you're doing in your job, which it is for me. But then there's also things like, for me, cooking. For somebody, it may be fishing. I think those are good things, and you need to do them because you need to have some way to relax. Right. Even I would think, watching. You mentioned the Patriots. Watching football on the weekend, which you can do with your family. It's something you do. I can do with my grandkids who also love football. There's all those things. I just think that part of this is just balance.
Yeah.
You have to have different things. You can't do, if you do any one of those things and that's all you did, that's not good. You have to have a mix of those things. Just to balance your life a little bit.
Yeah. And I love Adler's, like when I was reading Adler, it seemed like he was trying to take play or relaxation, and bring it down into a much smaller amount of time than, he's writing this, I think it's in the 60s, right? And so, the amount of free time that I think we have today is probably exponentially more than what even he was dealing with then. And he boils that playtime sort of down into, he never gives a moment, but sort of the impression I got was in a week, you might have a couple hours, and the rest you're spending in leisure toil or subsistence toil. And I felt like that was such a great perspective, because you do need that rest, but you don't need, if all you're doing is resting, then it's not a restful activity
or if all
anymore.
you're doing is playing computer games, that's doing something, but that's not doing anything that helps you or anybody else.
Right. And it seems like the question of asking, do we have too much free time and is that going to make us degenerate, is kind of an important question, but it strikes the modern ear funny. And I think that's because I've heard other people talk about the way that these questions came up was when you started to have the modern developments of convenience appliances or things like that. The thought was people are going to have more free time because
to contribute to society.
Yeah, because they don't have to cook and they can use the microwave. But instead, we filled that free time with more work. And the person asking the question assumes that we're just going to fill that. So now people in the question is, we're heading towards 25 and 30 hour work weeks because our data management is so much better now than it's ever been. And the reality is people just work more. Now we work 60-hour weeks and we do more and we're more productive and we're richer and we're not leisuring at all.
One of the things here too is the difference between means and ends. You usually work, and he used the term utilitarian somewhere in there. We usually work because that's a means to some end, which is presumably not work. And so there's a lot of problems there. One is that some people, they spend all their time on the means. They work towards some stated or unstated end, but they never get to the end. And I probably said this before on the show. I mean, when you get older, you start thinking, here I've been working towards something. What is that thing I'm working toward? What is the end of all this? That I've been, working to, have a salary and support a family and do all that stuff. And I think that most people don't think about that. They don't think about, and this whole system of retirement where you work all these years and you get a pension and you retire, and then what? For some people, they don't have, there's nothing there. You go live in a rest home and play shuffleboard. Is that that was the end of all this? Was it really worth all that? Whereas I think, I think probably all of us have some thing that we want to be able to do. For me, it's, sitting on my porch and reading a book,
Right.
But I get to do a lot of that for work because it has to get done now too. So I think that's another distinction that's important here that he doesn't really talk about too much.
And I think that brings us back to why this conversation is appropriate for us, because it seems like the Memoria Press curriculum, the mission of the Memoria Academy, Memoria College, Highlands Latin School, is to equip students with the ability to participate in that third category. That is, if leisure time is work in the liberal arts and the sciences, you have to be educated in those categories, or you'll fill your free time with work, or you'll fill your free time with play. So what are the ways that our mission helps students and equips them to do leisure work?
Well, I want to quibble.
Okay,
Can I
let's quibble. Let's do it.
So you just said, and I feel like we're losing the distinctions Adler makes. So you said, filling our free time with either work or with play,
Subsistence work.
and subsistence work, and so, I mean, so talking about how we equip. So like I found myself personally in a position like what Martin was talking about, that a lot of the what he calls leisure work, because it happens to be subsistence work for us. Like I go home mentally exhausted, right? Whereas I'm not physically exhausted. And so in some ways, in sort of an opposite way, my subsistence work is my leisure work, which means when I get home, my body's telling me you need to go do like what Adler would call subsistence work. You need to go work with your hands, right? And so in my world, it's kind of flipped, but that's where I think what we're training students to do is, if they're in a position where they're able to, where they're, what is providing for their family is something having to do with liberal arts, culture, civilization, where, yeah, maybe with Martin evidently has more intellectual stamina than I do. And so he goes home and he reads more, right? I go home, I go work with my hands a couple hours, then I'll sit down and read once I've got that break, right? And so if a child has come up through the liberal arts, they may end up with the mental stamina of Martin, and they can just go home and keep doing it. Or, let's say the students' gifts, what they want to do is work with their hands. They end up doing that during the day, and they come home and they end up contributing to culture and civilization through enriching themselves, passing that on to others in a leisure work outside of that.
We need an organic metaphor here, and here it is. Okay. There's plowing, there's planting, and there's harvesting. Okay. Plowing is that labor you got to engage in to enable yourself to plant something, which you maybe would be education. And then the harvesting is the leisure you're able to engage in after you've done those things. That's impressive to me.
That didn't help.
I agree with Martin in that I think what Dr. Adler is saying is that subsistence work is the work you do to continue collecting a paycheck. Whereas the leisure work for you, it is what was formerly probably many people's form of subsistence work. For you, it's still engagement in the sciences. And you're doing work that you choose to do to create a meaningful life for yourself but Netflix is not creating a meaningful life for you. It's
No.
not building anything, and that would be the distinction, right?
I suppose.
And
yeah.
you've been equipped to participate in farming through a robust education and to find it meaningful, because
Yeah,
you have the
absolutely.
philosophical categories for that.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Well, I think I might quibble a little bit with this distinction between subsistence and leisure work, because we live in a time, I think, which is unique in history. For instance, Martin said that in essence, Martin has monetized his leisure work.
Yeah.
Right. Right.
I wasn't going to tell
We're all
anybody
very
that.
Martin got someone to pay him to do what he would do if he didn't have to work.
Right.
So can we properly call what Mark gets paid to do subsistence work just because he gets paid to do it? I don't think so, right? And then on Paul's side, like we said, it's kind of switched. What was traditionally subsistence work, Paul does for free at home. Not really, but because he sells meat and things like that. He's monetized that as well. But it is a little bit switched. So I think in our time today, where we encourage people to pursue a vocation that is personally fulfilling, what we're basically saying is find a way to get paid to do what you would do with your leisure time.
I'm so impressed that a math guy came up with that.
I know.
insight.
It was impressive.
And I think that's unique in history. And so, well, there it is on the table. Let's talk about that.
I agree.
You want to make your vocation your occupation.
That's what we tell people. I mean, that's the way we're bringing up kids, right? We're basically saying, what do you want to do?
Yeah.
And then let's go find a way for you to do it, right? And that's the way you're going to earn your money. I mean, that's society's
Or even more so,
orientation.
figure out something you want to do and get people to pay you to do it.
That's right. You want to record videos, put them on YouTube and monetize it, right?
Right.
I mean, that's effectively what we're telling our kids to do.
Yeah.
Don't you think, though, that what you guys are suggesting is the 1% of 1%? Martin is not the norm. And I think our
He
curriculum
just said that Martin is abnormal, I think is what he just said.
does actually equip the rest to participate in leisure activities. But because I've been given the categories of the liberal arts and science, I'm able to participate after work for the hours that I have in things that I wouldn't naturally be drawn to. I am able to read and discuss and think about.
Well, we
deep
pushed you to
ideas.
reading fiction. Yeah.
And isn't that part of what we're trying to
Mhm.
equip people with the ability to do, so that their lives are meaningful and it's not just the emails and conflict and then Netflix?
Yes, I would heartily agree. Yes, on that. And, and we're helping people make these distinctions between, okay, you're going to sit down and read. Just because you're reading doesn't mean you're participating in leisure, right? So because a lot of books are written purely for their entertainment value, right? And so are you trying to read a book that encapsulates a great idea? Then we're participating in leisure.
And could we say that classical education uniquely fits people to do what you're talking about? Because a lot of modern education is because of a lot of this concern about using education to get a job. That this is the chief function of education, is to enable people to be workers in the economy. That is so utterly restricting. I mean, we just assume this, and we don't think about how that makes us less human almost. Is that really what we should be prepared? And we're not preparing them to do the kind of thing that we're talking about, that we can do, not just for work, but in our leisure time. Education should fit you to do both.
So, Tom, how does it do that? Well, can you draw some direct lines between the education we're providing and the preparedness for leisure activities?
I think that I know this is true in my home. One of the things that I'm trying to do with my children is ignite or incite in them a love for great literature. So it's not enough to impose, I think, a certain educational paradigm onto a child. We want to form their loves, and if I think that if I can, through example and through participation. So in other words, we read together every night as a family. What I'm trying to do is develop in their hearts a love for great literature, so that when they become adults, they will pursue that with their leisure time. Yes. So yeah, I think it's more than just here. You have to do these particular assignments in school. We have to show them what is good and lovely and desirable about pursuing these things.
I'd like to bring up Martin's need for an organic analogy here, organic metaphor.
I came up with that for you. You're a farmer.
But thank you. But, and I'm not trying to say the brain here is a muscle, but I think what we're doing, what Tom's talking about and getting his kids to love literature, he's also giving them skills, right? It's your bodybuilder who's going and working out those muscles again and again and again. And then they reach a point where what they enjoy is working out those muscles, right? And so if we help our students develop these skills that what Adler's calling leisure activities is what they enjoy and what they're good at, then outside of the subsistence work they have to do, that's what they will have a natural affinity for.
Me and Tom bond on this all the time, but we read, the Old Testament a little bit in its original language every day, and nobody makes us. But I wouldn't be able to do that if I hadn't been equipped with, for our students, it's Latin, but for me, it was Hebrew, as educated in that way. So, and it's like one of my chief joys is when I get to sit down at my desk and spend a few minutes doing that. And that is the kind of leisure activity that's very fulfilling and more fulfilling than some of the vapid entertainment that I also participate in on a regular basis.
You have to prepare to do the things that you really want to do. If you want to go out and play basketball, if you just are a couch potato and you sit, you can't do that. Mm-hmm. Okay. Even with your grandkids, you gotta in some way prepare yourself for it. And we need to prepare ourselves for the most things possible. And I think that's what we're trying to do in education is to prepare ourselves so that we can do anything that we may change our minds later about what we like to do, what we want to do. And if we've got a really broad education, we've developed all of our faculties, then we can do that if we want to.
Just apply your mind to it. And Martin says you can do anything. Last question.
Be all that you can be.
Jeez.
That's Army, Martin. I was in the Navy.
Oh, sorry. Okay. Yeah. Yes. What's your mind?
Anchors away.
Anchors away. Okay. Anchors away.
There you go.
The adventure awaits. It's been a number of different things over the years, but
last question. Adult listener who maybe finds themselves wanting to expand their time, their free time, or expand their leisure time by spending less free time playing and spending more time in leisure. What are some suggestions you would have for an adult to help them to focus on using that time well? Paul?
The only thing the one thing that's coming to mind when you brought that up, I don't know, for whatever reason, this may be completely unhelpful, but I remember as a kid always going, Dad will never watch TV with us. And it was interesting. I mean, we were limited in how much television we watched, but we knew that it was a rare occasion, a very special occasion when Dad would sit down and watch maybe a football game or something with us, but it was not a common thing. He was applying himself in other things that were beneficial to him, even though, kids need more time for rest and play. Adults don't. And he was showing us that example.
But you also need to find things that you all can do together. So, for example, now on this weekend, we're going to watch the NFL playoffs, and my boys like football. I like football. My grandsons like football. And one of them, unfortunately, is a Bucks fan. But that's valuable in and of itself too, is to be able to do something together, have some common point of interest where you can socialize. And so that's also important.
Yeah. So mine may not be helpful, but yours is, that's in the context of play. We're in the context of trying to get them more into leisure. Like he gave me that example of being able to restrict my amount of play, and I think you're right. We need to be able to find leisure ways, like ways to be together and do that in a way that's building leisure and in the sense of the basis of culture.
It strikes me, Martin, that your family, that you were intentional from the stories I've heard and meeting your sons, you were intentional about leisure in such a way that you're not sitting around during football games being like, I feel guilty for wasting this time. Like you've spent other time.
Oh
well.
yeah, no, a lot of reading aloud. My sons all have some intellectual activity they're engaged in that we talk about when we have dinner together and all that. So yeah, all those options are available to us because of that.
One recommendation, and this is just going back to the beginning, is if you don't find a way to reflect on the things you're reading, maybe try that. It's one way to take books and translate them. Maybe you can read books in a way that's purely entertainment, but there's a way that you can read them in a way that contributes to building leisure time into your life. And one way to do that would be reflect on them a little bit.
Well, and all of us are just involved in a discussion group that we haven't. I mean, to me, that's one of the funnest things that I do, even though it's intellectual. That to me, I mean, I think discussion is a means, but it's also an end. I mean, I can't think of a better way to live my life than getting together with my buddies and talking about books. I mean, it's a fun thing to do.
Tom, what about you?
I would say for a guy who was not classically educated, which I think maybe a lot of our parents are in that boat, and we see the value of it. We want our kids to have that. So for myself, what I would say would be helpful and how I've kind of tried to move in this direction is it's okay to start small. As Paul alluded to earlier, it's like training a muscle, which takes discipline. And the best way you can be successful with discipline is by starting small. So take a little chunk of time each day. And early on, you may have to kind of force yourself to do it, but over time, you develop the desire and the love for it, and then you can't get enough. And I've seen that in my own life, and so yeah, don't be afraid to start small. And
physical exercise is a great metaphor for this because the more you do, the more you are able to do, and it's the same with your brain as it is with your body.
Great. Well, I've really enjoyed this conversation. We'll see you guys next time. Thank you for listening to this episode of Classical Etc. If you enjoyed this conversation, please consider liking this video. If you want to join the conversation, then you can comment below. And if you want to stay connected, please subscribe to our channel. I hope you enjoyed this show, and we'll see you next time.